right here, and we are going to talk about the standard RL 3.7. Like I had mentioned before, we are going to look at the setting, the characters, the mood, and the illustration, and how all of those things work together to create different aspects of the story. So we are going to take a look at the story, Paul Bunyan and the Tallest Tree. Now, what we can do already as good readers, we can preview the text and look at the illustration that it's giving us. Now, if I take a look at this illustration, let me use a different pen. I notice that Paul Bunyan is older. He has a beard, right? He's scratching his head. He's looking at this tree, and there's this animal behind them. He looks like he's in some sort of forest. So it kind of gives me an idea of what I'm about to read. A man looks like he's, I'm assuming Paul Bunyan is going to be chopping down some sort of tree in the forest. So let's take a look and go ahead and start reading. Paul Bunyan was the tallest, strongest lumberjack who ever lived. One day his boss told him to chop down the tallest tree in the forest. The tree was easy to find because it was the only one taller than Paul. Okay, so as I take a look at this text, I already know who my character is. His name is Paul Bunyan, and it gives me some describing words for him. He is the tallest, the strongest lumberjack who ever lived. So he's the best of the best. And I also kind of see some words that describe the setting already. One day his boss told him to chop down the tallest tree in the forest. So we know that our setting is in the forest. Paul swung his axe. Thunk! The axe sliced halfway through the tree, and 2 tons of sawdust fell at Paul's feet. One more swing, thought Paul. He swung his axe again at the same place. Thunk! But the tree didn't fall. Right here, when we see that the tree didn't fall, we know that our problem has occurred. This tree is not falling. Paul stood back and stared up at the tree, and that is when he understood the problem. This wasn't just the tallest tree in the forest. It was the fastest growing tree as well. So when we read the words, Paul stood back and stared up at the tree, what do you think is happening? So when I stand back and look at something, I'm evaluating, I'm thinking. I might be a little confused as well. So maybe that is what Paul is doing right now. And if I take a look at the picture, this matches what it says. He's looking up at the tree and his hands on his head. He looks kind of confused. Paul returned with his spare axe and swung them both, one with his left hand, one with his right. Thunk! The blades chopped right through the trunk and met in the middle. The pine came tumbling to the ground, causing an earthquake when it fell. Paul Bunyan was tall and strong, but he was smart too. There we go with some of those describing words as well. He was smart, tall, and strong. So he overcame his problem by getting 2 axes and using them both at the same time, meeting the tree in the middle. So he overcame his problem. So after reading this story, we can say that Paul Bunyan was a strong man who had a problem and couldn't get the tallest tree to come down, but then he overcame his problem, got 2 blades, and knocked it down. So we're going to go ahead and fill in our chart over here. So with our setting, we want to think about the text evidence, those details in the story, and the illustration. Remember, don't worry about this part right here. You can just ignore that. So I'm going to take a look at the text evidence here, and I kind of already figured it out already. I filled this out before. It says, one day his boss told him to chop down the tallest tree in the forest. Our text evidence, we know, is in the forest. Sorry about that, guys. And then our illustration shows us there's trees, mountains, and animals. So if you look at the picture, we can see that the setting has trees, as mountains. There's an animal there that they didn't talk about, so that was not really important, this guy right here. So we can say that our setting is in a forest. So do you see how we used our text evidence right here, our illustration, and that helped us come up with a setting? So now our characters, we're going to do the same thing. Paul stood back and stared at the tree. This is when he understood the problem. This text evidence comes right here. Paul stood back and stared up at the tree. This kind of gives us an idea of what he is doing. And if you take a look at our picture, it matches exactly what he's doing. He has his hand on his head. So we're going to take a look at our illustration. Paul is looking up at the tree with his hands on his head. So in this moment, we can say that the character trait for Paul is confused. He's wondering why that tree is not falling. Why that tree is not falling down here. Now, we are going to talk about that mood, and that's our new vocabulary word. Do we get a positive mood or a negative mood? So let's take a look at the text evidence that we had here. So Paul Bunyan was tall and strong, but he was smart too. I read that whole story to kind of get the mood. You know, you can't really get the mood at the very beginning. You need to read that whole text. So just by reading the story at the end, I was able to see he was tall and strong, but he was smart too. So what kind of tone is that? Is it a happy tone? Is it a joyful tone? Let's take a look at what the illustration says as well, or looks like. Looking confused at the tree, wondering why it will not fall. So in the picture, it's showing us two different things from what the words are saying and what the illustration. So the picture is saying he's confused, he's looking up with it, his hands on his head, but at the end of the story, it's saying that he's strong and smart too. So we can say that the tone is the mood is triumphant. And triumphant means that someone overcomes a problem and that they're feeling very victorious. So if you read at the end of the story, the blades chopped right through the trunk and met in the middle. The pine came tumbling to the ground, causing an earthquake. So he was able to solve that problem and feel triumphant. He felt very smart, strong, and tall. So our mood is very victorious, strong, and triumphant. So that's all I have for you guys today. If you have any questions, be sure to ask your teacher and use this chart to help you when you're reading the story that's provided and you're working on your exit ticket.